So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what the Science Gateways Community Institute is before Carol gets started, because we are and they may be of interest to you. We're funded by the National Science Foundation to provide these services, either free of charge or for a low cost. And they include various consulting and resources and other kinds of services that bring this community together and enable everyone to learn from each other. So you can see here our goal to facilitate community sharing of experiences, technologies, and practices at little or no cost to community members through NSF-funded online and in-person resources and services. So I certainly encourage you to explore our website, which is where you went to register for this webinar. You'll find a lot more information about each of these different areas that I'm going to tell you briefly about right now. So the one area of our institute provides consulting services on a short-term basis about the kinds of topics that you may want to know a little bit about or a little bit more about but you don't know where to find access to an expert. So we have people who can talk about open source licensing and about sustainability and business planning and choosing the right technology and so forth. We also offer a boot camp, which is a week-long intensive program. And you might have noticed on our first slide that the applications for our next boot camp, which will be in early October, are due next week on the 28th. So at that boot camp, you get an intensive week of learning about all sorts of different things that are relevant to making your Science Gateway successful. In the extended developer support area, this next one is basically hands-on support. You'll get a person 25% allocated to help build your gateway in some way, and you can apply for that on our website. The Scientific Software Collaborative is the area that has produced a gateway catalog, which is about to be released for popular consumption, and it essentially provides a listing of gateways as well as information about software used to build them, and it also provides hosting environments so that you can try some of these tools and components. Community engagement and exchange is us who we are the people who bring you this webinar, as well as the Gateways 2017 conference, which is going to be in October from the 23rd to the 25th in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It will feature, in addition to the usual kind of keynotes and presentations from reviewed papers and demos and so forth, but also we'll have tutorials which will feature great things like maybe Jupyter. I'm not sure exactly entirely what our agenda is yet, but that's under development right now, and registration will be opening in early August. And then finally, our workforce development area provides various workshop and networking and internship experiences to students. We also provide funding for attending conferences, and so I encourage you, if you have a student that might be interested in this, to have them look into some of the resources available to them on our website as well. So that's us in short, and if you want to go to the next slide, I just want to make one more request. So a quick favor at the end of this webinar, the NSF provides us money to provide things like webinars and conferences and so forth. So we then give you these free webinars, but we can't demonstrate that we're having an impact unless we have people tell us that. So we have a 30-second feedback survey that we will provide a link to at the end of this. It's actually even less than 30 seconds. It only takes more, closer to that if you decide to write something. But there's basically a couple questions that are really short and then an open-ended request area and feedback. So I hope that you will at least take a moment to respond to that evaluation feedback survey at the end of this event. And we'll put that in the chat window so you can find it at any time. So with that, I am going to hand this off to Carol Willing, and she wears a couple of hats in the context of the work that she does, and is closely involved with the Project Jupyter team, and she's going to talk about Jupyter now.
Thanks, Catherine, and everybody at the Science Gateways that have helped put this together. It's really a great opportunity for us to share what we are working on in science and collaborating and education. So I wanted to start by saying that this is our Project Jupyter team, and we've got a number of really phenomenal people that, including Fernando Perez, that are working on this project. And there's a lot of aspects to the project, and I wanted to recognize all of them because this is really truly a team effort, not just within the Jupyter team, but the greater science community as well. And for those of you that have used Jupyter and have contributed to Jupyter, thank you. We really, really, really appreciate it. And I think the world is a better place because of it. Um, a little bit about me. I am actually on Jupyter's steering council, and I uh, am a core developer on both Project Jupyter, in specific Jupyter Hub, and I'm also a core developer on core Python. So I have a background in electrical engineering as well as a management background from MIT. I've worked in industry and academia, and I am very passionate about education and community outreach. And I look forward to seeing more great stuff from the community as we go forward. Um, just a little bit about the agenda. When I looked through the profiles of the folks that signed up for this webinar, there was quite a diverse background and interest level. So I have done my best to strike a balance between technical and overview. And I've included a lot of links, both within the presentation and also on a GitHub repo document. One of the things that I would like to say is it's a whirlwind tour that we're going to take today. And if you have additional questions, please do ask them at the end. Ask them on our various communications channels within Jupyter, or feel free to reach out to me personally. I will do my best to connect you to the information if I don't have it myself. So with that, let's talk a little bit about gateways. Back in 2013, I got my first taste of IPython notebooks, and it was through a music theory and musicology library called Music 21 that was being developed at MIT and is still around. And as I was working on this, I was looking for ways to engage people that maybe didn't see themselves as computer programmers, but people that wanted to apply the technology in different problem spaces. And since music is a universal language, I felt that if I could get folks interested and engaged in music, that they could then very easily see how the notebooks could be used in their own work. And building on that, in 2014, we started doing some introductory Python workshops in San Diego using at the time, IPython notebooks, which are now Jupyter notebooks. And what we found is that having the notebooks really broke down some barriers to entry. And I think one of the important things about a gateway is you want to be able to service people who perhaps are not computer scientists, but you want to give them the tools and the confidence to be successful, to do their work in a way that's meaningful for them. And I think one of the things that the notebooks did is it reduced the stress that people had while they were going through these workshops. So although this was an introduction to Python, you can imagine the same thing happening in biology, chemistry, engineering, any number of topics. And I think one of the things that Science Gateways is doing with their workshops really proves that out as well. In addition, through some of this work, we wound up building a very strong community within San Diego with both the Python community, the R community, and now more recently, the Julia community as well. And Andrea Zonka, who's at the San Diego Supercomputer Center, has been a real vital part of that. He's done a fabulous job both doing outreach locally, but also sharing his knowledge through his blog posts, and has really brought HPC and Jupyter together in a lot of ways. Also, we've done a number of software carpentry workshops, and Ilke Altinus had done a community workshop with us and the R community in the Python community, and introduced several hundred, 300 or so people to Jupyter Notebooks and how it can be used for data science and collaboration. So it might seem like you're starting with a little bit of something in a gateway, but very quickly it builds into something bigger. And I think what you're seeing with science gateways is exactly that. There's different elements that make up the ways that we serve different users. One size doesn't fit all. So it's really, how do we tailor the technology that we have to different groups of folks so that we can foster collaboration and reproducible research and fabulous uh, outcomes as a result of that? So this is Fernando Perez and Brian Granger. They are the two PIs on Project Jupyter and are fundamentally the founders of it. But I wanted to take a moment and talk about some of the ways that Jupyter serves not just the academic and science communities, but also the broader interests in our community called research, people from engineering, education, journalism. And what it does is it brings together different groups of people and allows them to collaborate together, to have conversations over data, and to communicate their ideas better. And what we see with our tools is that anywhere from really elementary school education all the way up to large scale supercomputer facilities, um, Jupyter is having an impact in a number of different ways. And at this point in time, there's more than 1 million people currently using Jupyter for everything. In fact, our best estimates from 2015 was there's over 6 million users of Jupyter Notebooks. And since we're an open source project, we don't necessarily have specific numbers, but we do know that on GitHub alone, there's over 1 million notebooks. And for those of you that haven't used notebooks and are kind of wondering what people are using them for, there's a link at the bottom, and GitHub actually has trending notebooks daily, weekly, and monthly, I believe. So you can see what the popular examples are at any given point in time. And as we've already discussed, the types of problems and data sets really range from finances, very large data sets with biology data, genomics, and also astrophysics, energy, really any subject that you can think of that collects data is a reasonable fit for Jupyter. And one of the things that we're seeing is, in addition to the local communities that we serve, the ability to accelerate research by being able to share things globally is also a huge benefit of Jupyter. And it's something that we see that we can reach wider audiences and do cross-disciplinary collaboration. I was recently in Taiwan, and it was really exciting to see the R community there, the Julia community, and the Python community all using Jupyter Notebooks, and a lot of work being done in machine learning and a lot of sharing of information, which was really fabulous to see. And we see the same thing in Europe and in other continents as well. So I think Chris Menzel, who is part of the Moore Foundation, put it nicely when he said, Jupyter Notebooks kind of enable us to pull together data, explore it, visualize it, and then share our analysis with prose or images in a way that encourages sound reproducible science and in turn helps us speed our progress. And As we look a little deeper at the Jupyter Notebook, we want to take into account that this is the classic notebook. So those of you that have been using Jupyter Notebooks, it's the Jupyter Notebook that you are all familiar with. What it is an interactive browser-based environment that allows you to combine code, narrative text in the form of Markdown, um, equations such as LaTeX can be rendered. It also allows you to do images, visualizations. You can drop in audio and video snippets as well. And although Jupyter is written in Python and JavaScript, it has language kernels that support over 50 programming languages and is very much a language agnostic tool. And as we've said before, it's all open source, so that makes it accessible to a larger group of people. This is an example of what the classic notebook looks like. There's a familiar menu bar across the top, and then there's this notion of cells as you go down the page vertically, and those cells can contain either code or Markdown or snippets like the visualization here that we see of measles data. Now, in addition to the notebooks, there's a lot of other projects within Jupyter that interact with the notebooks, and one of them is IPyWidgets. And one of the interesting things about IPyWidgets is it lets you add sliders and toolbars and um, uh, user interface elements that lets people actually interact in 3D with their data. And in particular, things like this graph on the right-hand side, it will actually, if you press the little play button on our website, you can actually see the red figures moving throughout 3D space. You can also manipulate the cube in 3D space. And for people that are learning or analyzing something, it gives, it kind of makes it easier to cognitively understand what's going on with data. And it also enables you to do a lot of what if analyses just by moving the slider at the bottom back and forth. So, and then some folks, particularly in the IPyVolume project, are really pushing the boundaries on using these widgets within their own documentation. And the documentation itself allows you to manipulate the different aspects of the IPyVolume 3D visualization library. And I do encourage you to take a look at it because it really gives an idea of what's possible and what's starting to be possible with interactive documentation for projects as well as just the notebook documents themselves. The classic notebooks, we call them notebooks because on the bottom right-hand side, you're doing work within it, but it actually encompasses more than just notebooks. It has a file browser on the top left. It has the ability to have an editor that you're using to write code or text, and also the concept of a console so that you can actually do file system manipulation if that's something that you choose to do. So that's the notebook as the classic notebook. Catherine, were there any specific questions on the notebook itself before I move along to Jupyter Hub?
Nope, there had been a question about supported languages, and one of our other listeners put a link to the web page that tells about that, and then you mentioned it like about a minute later. So
Oh, great.
you just happened to, yeah. So we're all set with questions at the moment.
All right. Yay, attendees and teamwork there. Okay, so Jupyter Hub is a way that we allow sharing of notebooks and actually access to notebooks and computing within a clustered or hub environment, much like Galileo's notebooks and being able to pass it around and use them for different things. The hub gives the ability for people to have their own Jupyter single user notebook server, um, in a variety of places. Because it's a web application. As long as you have a web browser, you can access Jupyter Hub. And so I would often show people, if I was at an entrepreneurial event or something in San Diego with maybe some faculty from UCSD, if they were saying, "Oh, my son's struggling with calculus," well, I was like, "Oh, have you seen these notebooks? You can pull up all these like math libraries like SymPy and actually do math and then visualize the concepts right there on their phone." And so it's a pretty powerful way to engage people and share context. That's sort of a small example, but you could imagine in a research environment the ability to share documents, code, and then have people actually be able to use it and execute those notebooks becomes a very powerful thing. And we're seeing it used in research, in education, in any number of industries, and it's really sort of changing the model of everybody must install stuff on their own device versus having that burden instead be on the cluster itself and the administrator of the cluster. So one of the things that we're seeing is a lot more exploration and prototyping happening earlier in people's learning cycles. Demba Ba, who's a professor at Harvard, who is actually an electrical engineering professor, took several groups of students now in his classes, and they were not trained developers in Python, and they were able to, within the course of a semester, take um, wearable electronics components, put together meaningful real world self directed projects, and um, he felt that the notebooks really accelerated their ability to both explain what they were doing as well as move forward quicker in getting projects that actually did real world applications. Another use of Jupyter Hub is the ability to provide students or researchers the ability to visualize and communicate data. Dr. Kristen Thing is an oceanographer and studies currents and things off the coast, and she's created these visualizations that you can actually see over time how they're moving, and it lets her students move from fairly simple tasks to more complex analyses in a shorter time frame. And I think that's one of the things that Jupyter Hub enables people to um, move forward with their teaching and spend more time on that because they're spending less time installing things. And we've definitely seen that at Berkeley, and where they have a Data 8 program where they're teaching data science fundamentals to um, members of the undergraduate campus and across a wide variety of disciplines from history to statistics. And um, what we are really seeing is the students are really um, doing advanced work. The same thing we see at Cal Poly when we run our data science classes there. At UC, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, I did a hackathon earlier this year with over 1,000 students, and I was absolutely floored with the number of students that knew how to use the notebooks and were actively using it within their own classes. So that was really a promising thing. So it's something that is already out there in the world being used, and I think that will make it better for those students that then when they go into the science fields, they'll be prepared, they'll be comfortable. And one of the things that we've recently put together as a result of the work that had come out of Berkeley is a Zero to Jupyter Hub guide, deploying it using Kubernetes. And it is, for those of you that have tried to deploy Jupyter Hub before, and it was a little bit hard because you've got a newer project that perhaps hasn't had the best documentation in the world, and we're trying to change that. But really, this is a straightforward way of setting up your own Jupyter Hub instance and in a Google Cloud instance or other cloud provider. So I encourage you to take a look at that when you have a chance. Another thing that we're really excited about, Jeremy Freeman and his lab had put together something called Binder, which lets you share a repo of notebooks. And then by pressing the launch button, you will then be dropped into an interactive notebook environment with the notebooks and data related to the notebook. And we have recently rewritten a large chunk of that code base to make it faster and more stable, and you'll be hearing more about it now and in the future. Right now, there's a link at the bottom to a beta of this, and I encourage you to try it out. We also have the code up on GitHub under the Jupyter Hub organization called Binder Hub, and that will walk you through how, if you wanted to set up your own Binder Hub itself, you could do that as well. And there will definitely be work on this moving forward. And what it has really allowed us to do is by having things like Binder and Jupyter Hub, things like LIGO and the very famous notebook that was done on the black holes colliding was shared with a wide variety of people. And I think it really expands the overall community's understanding of science, and especially science that may not be your first discipline, but something that you're interested in, but you don't have the technical background perhaps or the training to understand without being walked through it. Very quickly, I'm going to kind of go through where we are with Jupyter Hub. We recently introduced the concept of services, which allows really any process or program to talk to the Hub's API and interact with it. So it allows us to authenticate users and requests for a service, and we use it with things like NBGrader. NBGrader is something that is used in an education setting to grade students' assignments, to release assignments to students. Also, folks are using services to cull any idle notebook servers that are out there so that they're not persisting once people are done using them. And things like NB Viewer, which lets people post their notebooks and let people see it. And where we're going with Jupyter Hub is we are trying to put together better support for other front-end proxies like Nginx and Kubernetes, and that has been going well. You could follow the progress on the Jupyter Hub repo on GitHub. We're also enabling multiple servers per user, which lets us really offer a variety of different computational configurations and access to different resources that we couldn't when there was only one notebook server per user. And good work is being done there. We're also making Jupyter Hub an OAuth provider, which will eliminate some of the complicated cookie management that we had before, and will also allow us to scale even better over time with services and the number of users on the hub. There's also a project called HubShare, which is going to be a service for sharing notebooks between groups and individuals. And one target use case is in education, when you're distributing assignments and collecting assignments, you would want students to be able to perhaps collaborate with the instructor or other classmates, and there'll be more coming from that. And we're looking to release 0.8 in the near future, so that you should be able to get that fairly soon. Any questions, Catherine, on Jupyter Hub before I move forward? I know I kind of went through it kind of quickly, but there are some really good resources in the GitHub repo for this webinar that provide a lot more depth.
No, there aren't any questions at the moment. Oh, someone just came through. So can users do shared code development?
Can users do shared code development?
dev. Yeah.
Okay, so like simultaneously working on the same notebook in real time? The answer is, if that's the question, the answer is soon. And we're actually going to talk about it a little bit as we look at Jupyter Lab. There is currently a real-time collaboration project within Jupyter Lab that allows people to communicate over Google Notebooks and chat. And we are actually using it for those folks that follow the Friday Jupyter Lab developer calls. They're actually using it within those calls. So, and there's also some good links to its display within a recent PyData Seattle conference, where there was a talk on Jupyter Lab that actually illustrates the real-time collaboration at work. So I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to reach out to me later.
There's one other question,
Sure.
which is, can you do test-driven development in Jupyter?
Can you do test-driven development in Jupyter? Sort of. And I think it will become, in the classic notebook, it's somewhat difficult to do that. With Jupyter Lab, I think what we're going to see is a greater ability to do that. And I'm going to hold off answering it further until we go through this Jupyter Lab section, and then we can pick it up again after going through that, because I think there's more interaction between consoles and notebooks that would make test-driven development an easier thing to do when using Jupyter Lab.
Great, thanks. No other questions at the moment.
All right, well then let's talk about Jupyter Lab, because it's sort of something that is new and coming out, and we're really excited about it, and the feedback about it at a couple of recent conferences has been really, really positive. So when we look at the classic notebook, or the things that people are using Jupyter for, we see some fundamental building blocks. People want a file browser. They have notebooks. They want access to a terminal or a console. They want different text editors. The kernels are what we call language kernels. So they want the ability to use multiple different languages and tailor their research. Like sometimes R is better for statistics than some of the Python libraries, or Julia is faster in certain circumstances than Python, so you'd like to use that. So the language agnostic part is really important. And then people have a variety of different ways that they would like to output their data, whether it's with prose, with equations, with foreign languages, with a number of different visualizations. There's some amazing visualizations libraries out there. And So all of these things come together, and in our development of Jupyter Lab, and I want to recognize a number of folks that have really been spending the better part of the last year working on Jupyter Lab and have done a phenomenal job with it. Jupyter Lab is really taking that classic notebook, re-architecting it and evolving it so that you can take those building blocks and mix and match them together in different ways so that you can tailor your own environment to what your needs are. And recently at SciPy, Jason Grout did a whirlwind tour of Jupyter Lab in a lightning talk. So in 5 minutes, you can get a pretty good overview of what Jupyter Lab will offer. And if you watch his presentation in real time, we're going to kind of do a whirlwind tour here with me talking you through it. But Jupyter Lab, you've got a whole new interface than the classic notebook was, yet you can still use it in the same manner that you use the classic notebook. What you've got is a file menu across the top. Down the side, you have different tabs. The second tab down is the Google Docs real-time collaboration, that if you clicked on that, it would bring up any shared Google notebooks that you had. And the interface allows for launching notebooks from a variety of languages or launching programs within the console or the terminal or text editors. So it looks similar, but it has a lot more functionality, and it's been designed in an extensible modular way. If you want to learn more about Jupyter Lab, and I highly recommend the first two links here, PyData Seattle spent, it's about a half an hour talk, and it really walks through, probably the last third of the presentation walks through real-time collaboration and demonstrates it. The second link is to Jason's lightning talk from SciPy, which was just a week or so ago. And that's 5 minutes long and really gives you a flavor of what can be done in Jupyter Lab. And we'll look about a little bit now. But as I said, it's a new implementation of the notebook. And so there is some nice user interface and UI design things. It's a little more modernized than the classic notebook was. You can see here that in this cell 2, there's a big blue bar on the left-hand side of the cell. And one of the things that enables folks to do is actually to collapse the cells and drag the cells around. That's something that people have been requesting for a long time, and we're happy to say that Jupyter Lab supports it very well. It also lets you do some collaboration between tools. And when I say tools, you might want to have a notebook communicating with a console, and you can do that because multiple of these tools can actually communicate with a Jupyter kernel. And it will allow you in a situation like this to execute things in your notebook, but then have it connected to a log in the console where the commands that you're executing are being recorded in the console, and so you can have a running view of what you've done in terms of executing code cells. But you can also, on this right-hand side at the bottom, you can explore individual variables and elements without messing up your notebook. And that's something that really extends the usability of the notebooks and the sort of the exploration of your data and algorithms that you're using within your research. There are a number of different editors that are going to be supported with Jupyter Lab, and much like some of you may have seen before, we do support Markdown. Right now, you can write Markdown in a window in Jupyter Lab, and then actually have a preview of it side by side, which is really nice. And you could imagine if you're writing up course curriculum or a research paper, it's nice to see the rendered view and the source view. In addition, the editor itself can be connected to a console. So here we see in the middle a Markdown file that has a large code snippet in the middle, which is doing a plot using matplotlib. By hovering over that code snippet and hitting Shift-Enter, you can actually run that code snippet in that bottom right window in the console, and then interact with it within the console as well. And that's pretty nice because you can, on the fly, execute code and visualizations just from the snippets that are already there. And should you get too many windows open or too many documents open, you can still go back to the classic notebook look by hitting Shift Command Enter on any of the windows, and it will take you into a single document mode. And we felt like this was very important, one, for sort of giving people focus on things, but also we wanted to make it a fairly seamless transition for folks that really enjoy the simplicity and the cleanness of the classic notebook to have that same ability to have the same experience in Jupyter Lab and not make it sort of this overwhelming experience. Oh my gosh, I've got all this stuff that I can do, but all I want to do is the notebook. You can still do that. And because of the modular design of Jupyter Lab, it is very extensible. And at SciPy last week, there were a couple folks that really wanted a FASTA viewer for Jupyter Lab. So they spent an evening and in a couple dozen lines of code wrote a FASTA viewer. And you can actually, on the video itself, see it actually, you can move around the segments and see them. And in addition to just having a viewer, they also, with the same code, were able to make a notebook extension that could then be used in this notebook here on the left-hand side. So midway down that page, you can see FASTA and in parens data is actually now being used as a notebook extension, which enables you to go very quickly from some code that you develop to actually an extension that could be used in other people's notebooks. So it can definitely be used to creating user interfaces and sharing functionality amongst people. In addition, the use of Phosphor.js and some work by Chris Colbert on creating a grid UI element allows us to explore large data sets. And in an example that they showed at SciPy, they had 1.2 million rows, a 200 megabyte CSV file, something that couldn't be opened in an Excel spreadsheet just because you'd be limited by Excel. It takes a few seconds to load, but then once it's loading, it's very easy to scroll through all the data, and it's really smooth. And rumor has it, there's a trillion row by trillion column demo that Chris has done as well. And I think for those people that are working with large data sets, this is going to be a really attractive feature in Jupyter Lab over the classic notebook. So that was a very whirlwind tour of Jupyter Lab, and I suspect there might be questions. So before
Yes.
to next steps. I will do my best to answer those questions.
Yeah, there's just one question so far, which was, can you run Jupyter Lab in Jupyter Hub?
Yes, you can run Jupyter Lab and Jupyter Hub, and there is a project within the Jupyter Hub repo called, I think, Jupyter Lab Hub or something, and that shows you how to do it. And in fact, we are making it so the binder service will also use Jupyter Lab within it. So that should be pretty cool as well. And I'm going to wrap up because the next steps are fairly short, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might still have, or at least guide you to whatever resources might be helpful to you.
Terrific.
So the call to action is really, we want to make gateways for folks, and we recognize that different scientific disciplines are going to have different needs when it comes to gateways. So I think it's really important that as we recognize that it's not a one size fits all, how do we share best practices? How do we share information? And I think from a Jupyter standpoint, one great place to start is to join the Jupyter mailing list. We have several. We have a generic Jupyter mailing list, and also a Jupyter in Education mailing list that focuses on using all sorts of the Jupyter ecosystem for teaching. And then there's also, it hasn't been used very much yet, but we are hoping that it will be used more. We do have a Jupyter in HPC mailing list, and some of the folks on this call might be interested in that. And I encourage you to participate in a sprint if you're at a conference and it doesn't have to be a Jupyter project. It could be any project that's science related, but working in a sprint gives you a different flavor of how things are put together, and really accelerates you down your own learning path on a project. So I would highly recommend that. Give a talk or write a blog post. The blog posts that Andrea Zonka wrote have been absolutely priceless for a large number of people, particularly folks that were trying to get Jupyter Hub up and running, a year or so ago. His posts really helped in particular environments, and giving a talk and sharing how you're using it is also really helpful, because we don't all want to be reinventing the wheel, and if you've got something great, other folks want to hear about it. Much like Science Gateways, offer workshops. Workshops have a multiplier effect, I believe. It's sort of like I tell 2 people, they tell 3 people, and it really expands the reach of what is being done in a way that all these other things can't. It gives you that hands-on, practical usage of things that you can then share with others. Contribute to your favorite project. We are a fairly small team that is doing all this stuff in Jupyter, so we do welcome contributors of all levels, all experience levels. If you love writing documentation, we would love you to do that. If you want to write code, if you want to share. I know in the Jupyter Hub world, Jupyter Hub has this concept of authenticators and spawners, and those are very closely tied with different deployment environments. So a number of folks in the HPC community have contributed back some of the different spawners and authenticators they've written, and that's been really useful for everybody. And as I've been saying all along, share your successes and trials. And I'm not sure why this is, I think I just went backwards. Sorry about that. Okay, so then resources. At the bottom left is a link to a repo that I have with this presentation, and also a larger list of links and links to some of the talks that I've already mentioned, all consolidated in one place to make it easier for folks. And I encourage you to check out those. And I think the rest of the stuff we sort of said. We do have Gitter channels for a number of our projects, and we are happy to answer questions on Gitter. And the resources page actually has links to the Jupyter Hub, Jupyter Lab, and Jupyter Gitter channels. So please do ask your questions there if we don't answer them here. We are having our first ever JupyterCon in August of this year, and we are very excited about that. If you're attending, please introduce yourself. I would love to talk with you in person and hear how you're using Jupyter. And if I leave you with nothing else, I want you to know that the Project Jupyter is open for you. We want you to be successful. We want you to use these tools in whatever way works for your use case, workflow, and environment. And basically, we all want better science, better reproducible science, and greater access to it. So I wanted to take a moment and have a huge thank you to the Project Jupyter team and community. It is the hard work and passion of many, many people that makes this all possible, including the support of some fabulous funders and people that are doing great work in the community. And so from all of us, thank you very much. And with that, I will bring up the link to the feedback form. Please do take the 30 seconds and fill that out for Catherine and the Science Gateways community, because they're doing great work that complements much of the work that others are doing in the science community. And I think it's a really valuable service that they offer. So with that, Catherine, if there are other questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. So there was a question asked that there's been a really helpful participant named who you may know, I don't know, Jonathan Rush, who has been like throwing links up here as well.
Nice. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah. And he also put a link to, I guess, your own GitHub place where you posted a bunch of resources. So
fantastic.
Yeah, but there was a question that he partly answered. So one person, Jason, asked, "Is there a list for people exploring Jupyter in education?" And it looks like there's a Teaching with Jupyter list.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, and then he continued to say and says, "I am going to a hackathon on the subject, but I know there have been others. Is everything on GitHub, or is there a better way to find out about who is doing what?"
We are trying to, okay. So a lot of times, because we're an open source project, we don't know what everybody's doing. I do know that there's been a number of education talks as well as education breakouts or birds of a feather at a number of the PyData conferences, at the SciPy conference. There will definitely be an emphasis on it at our upcoming JupyterCon. I think the best place to start is on the Jupyter and Education mailing list. And if there's specific things that you're looking for or are interested in, feel free to just ask that on that mailing list, because I think the bulk of the people that are on that list are really passionate about education and willing to share their ideas. Beyond that, within the Jupyter Hub documentation, there is a gallery of interesting deployments, because as the project was evolving, people were doing things that we had no idea they were doing. And so when we would find out about them, we would add them to that document. But feel free, if you've got some interesting things that you're doing, to share them with the group. There's also a gallery of interesting notebooks, which may be helpful for educators because it really shows the breadth of topics and uses that people are using the notebooks for. So I guess if I had to say, is there one specific place? Probably not. But the best place to start would be the Jupyter and Education mailing list, and it's got a pretty good, healthy archive as well. So you may find some real gems in there.
So another question is, do you know if anyone has submitted a BOF for Supercomputing 17? The deadline is July 31st.
I don't know if anybody has, partially because I don't know who, if anyone, from the Jupyter team is going to be attending. But if somebody has the interest and wherewithal to just put together a BOF, I say go for it, because I would be happy, even if I don't wind up attending Supercomputing, to remotely answer questions or participate remotely. So please do submit it if you can. It would be much appreciated, and then let us know that you've submitted it so that we can support it.
That's great. And then there's a question: how is Jupyter ecosystem thinking about security as code is executable on a user's web browser? And just so you know, someone did put a link up on GitHub about something about security, which I can put on our website for everyone to see afterwards too. But
right, security. I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that. I know that within Jupyter Hub we take it very seriously, and we have documentation on what we feel is important to do in terms of securing your hub. That said, you are executing in a browser, and there are things being done to add additional security, like different efforts and best practices. But at the end of the day, it's as safe as your browser is safe. And I think if you have specific questions, it would be probably useful to read the Jupyter Hub security pages, and then ask Min or others on our Gitter channel, and we'd be happy to kind of answer any specific questions that folks have.
Terrific. That actually ended. That was the last question that we have. Oh no, we got a last lingering question, although it is top of the hour. So we'll take this last question. If people are signing off,
Short.
I do want to thank you for joining us, though, and do please respond to our evaluation. The first two questions literally take 5.5 seconds. So, but the last question here was: Jupyter notebooks are great for educational purposes. Can you give an example or two on research or a science project using Jupyter Notebook? Or maybe if there's, I'm thinking maybe there's a website where someone could see examples. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the NB Viewer and the Gallery of Interesting Notebooks, those two places are probably good starting points, as well as if you look through just the talks that are being given at many, many conferences, like the Julia Con just happened. There are many research projects that are using it, and LBL is using it. Lorena Barba has been using it extensively in her research in aerodynamics, and I'd be happy if somebody wanted to send me a link. I would do a little research and pull together some resources for them specifically.
Fantastic. So we can put your email on our when we post the video. We could put that up for people. Or is there a better way to reach you?
The better way to reach me is to reach out to me through either the Jupyter mailing list or GitHub. I tend not to be. I get an exorbitant amount of email, and it is very hard to get through it. So you're happy to email. I'm happy if you email me, but if you don't get a response, don't take it personally. Continue to follow up and email me again. I am doing my best, but when I travel, it becomes really hard to keep up with it. So, but I do check Gitter and GitHub every day, and that is a great way to get a hold of me.
Sounds like a good plan. Well, thank you so
Cool.
much, Carol, for this whirlwind tour of all of the different components of Jupyter, and I feel like I understand it better now because I only had the vaguest sense of it, except that it was cool and lots of people use it. So
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for attending, and I think the best thing to do is play with it because that's it kind of just all clicks in once you start using it. Um, in a way, it makes computing fun and research fun, because you can share and collaborate in a different way, and see the results instantaneously in many cases. So that's a nice thing too. So
that's
thank you
really
everybody.
cool. Yeah, thank you, Carol.